I landed in Jacksonville just after dawn, the tarmac fog reflecting the sickly yellow glow of floodlights. My duffel bag felt like it was filled with lead, painted with the stenciled words SSGTM, Carter, 1-18 INF, and every step off that Air Force charter felt heavier than the one before. I hadn't been home in 19 months, but I already felt like a stranger in my own body. The air tasted of wet asphalt and diesel. I paused at the terminal doors, braced myself, then stepped through. Into a world that looked the same but felt entirely alien. A small cluster of families waited in the arrivals hall, holding welcome home signs with tinsel and cartoon soldiers. I saw a kid in a dress uniform t-shirt holding a glittery, "Thank you," placard. I heard laughter, chatter, the muted hum of a news camera crew hoping for a tear-jerking moment. I saw none of it. All I heard was the distant thunder of mortar fire, echoing in my skull. Only inches behind every laugh, every distant drop of rolling luggage. My boots clacked on linoleum. My shadow stretched across the walls, a dark smear. I shoved my hands in my pockets and kept walking, past the crowds. I didn't slow for the tight-lipped salute from a junior NCO in dress blues. Didn't dodge the sobbing grandmother elbowing past to grab a fold-and-tuck flag. Because my brain had already slammed the gates shut, combat mode. Alert. Aim and fire. I punched the door release on my duffel, no, on my life. Out blew a cloud of dust and sand from Iraq, grains I'd scooped into every crack of my gear, invisible witnesses to weeks spent under a baking sun, in foxholes, in body bags, in the locked cage of my own mind. Outside, the airport shuttle was loading. Father. Mother. Who, what, were back there? Faces in a haze. I climbed aboard, found a seat by the window. The engine idled, exhaust fumes billowing. We drove off. And I saw a world at peace. No bullet holes gouging buildings. No pickup trucks piled high with sandbags. No distant cables coursing with the crack of radios. A strip mall, neon signs flickering, Starbucks drive-through. A kid on a scooter, looping circles in the parking lot. A stray dog nosing through trash cans. A young couple laughing as they locked hands, obviously head over heels. None of it should have mattered. But I felt a choke in my throat. Traffic slowed at a light and I looked down the line of cars. On the hood of an SUV, a child's block letter, I read "Heart Daddy," stuck to the windshield. I closed my eyes. I couldn't stop seeing the image of my buddy Reyes, missing half his face, pinned against a Humvee. Couldn't unhear the screech of metal twisting, the scream of his mother over the radio. That siege never ended. It followed me home. The shuttle dropped me at the curb. I grabbed my bag and looked around. The civilian world glowed under half-broken street lamps. The air was thick with the promise of rain to come. I saw my parents, bad posture, strained smiles, eyes watering as they tried to look proud but worried. Mom held a bouquet of carnations, Dad wore a stiff tie. "Michael." Mom called, voice quivering. I walked to them. They hesitated, then closed the distance. Dad's hand on my shoulder felt like a steel trap. Mom's hug felt like cotton wool. "Son," Dad said, voice low. "Welcome home." Her perfume felt like pain. My chest tightened. "Thanks," I said. "Glad to be back." I knew that was a lie, but I said it anyway. We piled into my old Jeep, rusted, dented from my last leave, the passenger seat still stained with spilled coffee. The steering wheel cover I bought at PX in Kuwait with Reyes's lemon yellow HOOAH bumper sticker still peeling at the edge. We drove through sleepy streets, street lamps blinking like watchful eyes. I knew the route by heart. Elm to Maple, Maple to Sunrise. My block sat nestled between a closed hardware store and a shuttered pawn shop. The yard was overgrown, the mailbox leaning at a drunken angle. My welcome home banner drooped, plastic letters rattling in the breeze. The porch light flicked as we approached. Dad kept talking, about dinner plans, about the neighborhood association wanting to get the grass cut. I heard nothing. I was scanning, windows, shadows, movement at the edges of my vision. Every hum of an air conditioner sounded like a drone engine starting. Every distant bark a mortar round. When we pulled into the driveway, I shut off the engine and sat still, chest pounding. My flashlight reflex thumb hovered over the door lock, half expecting an insurgent sniper to pick me off through the windshield. Mom reached back. "Michael, come inside." I opened the door. Air hit me, scented candles, carpet cleaner, something sweet and too familiar. My boots left footprints on the welcome mat, my prints, among the muddy ones from the last thunderstorm. The front door opened. The hallway light revealed a living room untouched, staged for Hallmark, framed photos of my graduation, of family vacations, a TV table with coasters, a knit throw on the sofa. No signs of war. No signs of me. I hung my duffel on the coat rack. Looked at my parents. Standing stiff, acting normal. "Go on," Dad said quietly. "Your room is the same. Dinner in an hour." I nodded and walked down the hall. My old room was a mausoleum. Posters of metal bands and vintage comic art plastered the walls. My twin bed still dressed in a camouflage comforter from '05. On the desk, textbooks I never returned lay in a neat stack. A half-empty tub of protein powder, a damp towel on the floor. A pair of running shoes coated in spider webs. I flicked on the light. Dust motes danced like microscopic ghosts in the beam. I closed the door and stayed in the doorway, breathing shallow, as though I'd just cleared a building mined with IEDs. I sat on the edge of the bed. A moment ago I was a combat-seasoned soldier. Here, I was a scared kid who hadn't been home in too long. I fumbled with my fatigues, green, faded, smelling of smoke and sweat. I peeled them off, one piece at a time, boots, pants, shirt. I flung them onto the floor like grenades I didn't intend to retrieve. I unhooked my dog tags and let them clink on the mattress. I ran a hand over the plastic ID card and social security number embossed in steel. It felt like a shackle. My fingers found a single item in the pocket, a crumpled photograph, just me and Reyes, screaming with adrenaline as our Humvee barreled over a crest in the desert. Dust behind us looked like a mushroom cloud. In the background, a distant mountain of black smoke rose over a charred village. I smoothed the photo. My reflection in the window showed a face I didn't know, temples gray, eyes hollow, jaw clenched. Hair grown out, uneven. I rubbed my cheek and winced, a phantom ache under the skin, like shrapnel itching to be found. A crash from downstairs, Mom dropping dishes. My body tensed. I swallowed, got to my feet, went to the doorway. Listened. The house was too quiet now. No laughter, no microwave beep, just the ticking of a clock on the mantel. I backed away and shut the door. Cut off the world. Months later, I only count days now by flashbacks. I still haven't slept right. Every few hours I wake up on the bed, staring at the ceiling fan's blades, but they spin too slowly. The world feels slowed. My brain replays explosions at hyperspeed. My heart pounds in my ears until I think it'll explode. Nightmares, walking through this house, but the walls are made of sandbags. The floor is concrete, spattered with fresh blood. I step on something, soft, slippery. My wife? My parents? A child's corpse. I can't tell until I look down. My boots are stained red. I leave the bed, my boots already laced. I step into the hallway, but the walls have crack patterns like bullet impacts. The clock on the mantel bleeds black oil. The front door is ajar. Outside, I see a wall of dust and helicopters overhead, a convoy stalled in the street. I run. I wake up. Tonight, I shot the neighbor's mailbox. It was a rusted thing anyway, rust-spotted steel. He came out cussing, shotgun in hand, only to find me on his lawn, rifle in arms, eyes unblinking, muttering, "Clear," as if I'd just cleared a room full of insurgents. He fired a warning shot. His wife screamed. I dropped the rifle and fled into the night, running down empty streets until the police chased me with sirens and flashlights. Now I'm on edge. They're on their way to take me away. My heart is a jackhammer. I'm back in the zone. Every shattered street lamp is a booby trap. Every patrolling cop car, an enemy vehicle on overwatch. The world is a battlefield. I know what's happening, my mind is locked into combat mode. The war didn't end. It just moved inside me. I'm still clearing rooms, just now the rooms are my parents' home, the neighbor's yard, the edge of my own sanity. I'm writing this because I have to. I need to document it before the nightmares swallow me whole. Before the next trigger snaps me into autopilot and I find myself firing rounds at shadows on the freeway. Everything in me is adrenaline, fear, and red mist. Tomorrow I'll wake and the sun will be too bright. I'll taste gunpowder on my tongue. I'll see the blood spatter on my hands, though I haven't fired in months. I don't know if I'll ever come down from this high-voltage terror. I don't know if there's a safe room, or if the safe room is just a foxhole in my mind. But I'll keep fighting. Because that's all I know. Because home isn't safe. Home is the war. Home is hell. The morning sun slipped through my bedroom blinds in thin, sharp slashes. It carved lines of light across the cracked plaster walls, lit up the dust motes like 1,000 tiny warships adrift in a silent sea. I lay in bed, eyes wide open, listening to the house breathe around me. But the silence wasn't peace. It was a loaded weapon. My muscles twitched beneath the thin cotton sheets. My heart thudded like a war drum in my ribs. I was wide awake, yet trapped inside a fog that blurred the edges of reality. I could feel the war humming beneath my skin, a pulse that never faded, never stopped pounding. I sat up slowly, feeling the cold bite of the wooden floor through my bare feet. The air smelled stale, an old mix of cigarette smoke, candle wax, and something metallic, like blood long dried but never fully washed away. The quiet was so thick it pressed against my eardrums, like I was underwater and every breath was a struggle. My hands shook as I reached for the alarm clock on the nightstand. It was dead. No blinking lights, no ticking. The silence was total. I didn't want to get up. Not really. Because every step, every movement outside this room, was like walking through a minefield. Every creak of the floorboard, every rustle of the curtains, was a trigger waiting to detonate inside my head. But I forced myself to stand, to move, to face the day. Downstairs, the kitchen was cold and quiet. The walls wore their usual yellow paint, peeling at the corners. The refrigerator hummed like a dying engine, a low, constant vibration that seemed to echo the buzzing in my head. I reached for a glass, but my hand was unsteady, and the glass clattered against the counter. I flinched. Mom's muffled voice called from the living room. "Michael? Are you okay?" I didn't answer. The last thing I wanted was sympathy. Or to be seen as broken. I poured cold water and drank it fast, the liquid burning my throat in the best way I could find relief. Then I stepped outside. The front yard was bathed in the brittle light of morning, but it felt alien, like looking at a war zone through a fogged lens. The grass was overgrown and tangled. The trees whispered in a dry wind that sounded like voices from another world. A crow cawed somewhere nearby, sharp and sudden. I started walking down the sidewalk, boots crunching over gravel and broken glass. My eyes darted everywhere, parked cars, windows, shadows beneath porches. Every movement in the periphery sparked an alert. My mind flipped back to Iraq, the enemy lying in wait behind every corner, the sand turning to dust with each explosion. My stomach clenched. The neighbor's dog started barking, a deep, menacing growl that sent a shiver racing up my spine. I froze. The dog's growl escalated, primal and raw. I raised my hands slowly, as if surrendering to an unseen enemy. Then the dog bolted out from behind a fence, barking and snapping. I stumbled back, heart hammering in my ears. The dog circled me, teeth bared, hackles raised. For a moment, my hands found my sidearm, imaginary, of course. But the reflex was so fast, so ingrained, my fingers clenched as if holding a gun. The owner finally appeared, shouting and dragging the dog back. I let out a shaky breath, but my whole body was still wired tight, every nerve on fire. Back inside, I leaned against the kitchen counter, trying to breathe normally. But the silence was shattered by a sudden loud bang. The back door slammed shut. My head whipped around. The room was empty. I walked to the door and opened it slowly. The backyard was empty, just wind stirring dead leaves, a broken swing creaking softly. I closed the door, but the bang echoed in my mind, a gunshot in a quiet village. That night, the war found me again. I lay on my mattress, staring at the ceiling. Every shadow on the wall became an enemy soldier creeping forward. My blanket was a camouflage netting, tangled around me like barbed wire. The fan above spun lazily, but its rhythmic noise was a gunshot countdown. My ears filled with phantom sounds. Distant mortar fire, the scream of a radio operator begging for medevac, the heavy thud of boots on cracked pavement. Suddenly, the front door rattled, a hard, violent knock, rapid and unrelenting. My heart leapt into my throat. I grabbed the baseball bat by the bed and crept toward the window. I peered out. Nothing. No one. The knocking stopped. Silence swallowed the house again. But my breath came fast, shallow. Sweat dripped down my back. I tried to tell myself it was the wind. A neighborhood kid playing pranks. But I knew better. That knocking was a warning. A countdown. The war was inside these walls now. Over the next days, the tension built like a festering wound. Every noise was a threat. The mailman's footsteps sounded like enemy patrols. The flashing blue lights of a distant police car became helicopters overhead. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in the desert, lying under a blistering sun, trying not to scream as my buddy bled out beside me. The smell of blood was thick in my nostrils, sharper than the scent of grass or soap or cigarette smoke. I started carrying a pocket knife everywhere. At the grocery store, the fluorescent lights buzzed and flickered. The aisles stretched endlessly like the lines of sandbags in a combat zone. The aisles were crowded, but to me, every person was an enemy combatant. I could feel eyes on me. I saw hands twitching near pockets, faces shadowed and unreadable. Suddenly, a cart crashed into my leg. I stumbled, nearly dropping the groceries. The man who bumped me muttered an apology and hurried away, but I saw the look in his eyes, fear or judgment, I couldn't tell. I gripped the cart's handle, knuckles white. I could feel my pulse slam into my ears. I wanted to scream, to lash out, to run. Instead, I swallowed hard and kept moving, heart pounding like a grenade ready to go off. One night, I woke up drenched in sweat, gasping for air. I could hear voices, harsh, urgent, in the darkness. A firefight was breaking out right outside my window. I grabbed my old Kevlar helmet from the closet, the straps worn and frayed. I crouched by the window, heart hammering. But when I peeked out, there was nothing but a quiet street, bathed in street lamp glow. Just a stray cat scurrying into the bushes. Sometimes I wonder if this hell will ever end. If the war will ever leave me alone. But every night, the darkness folds over me like a blanket of gunfire. Every day, the world turns into a minefield of threats. and every breath I take feels like a battle for survival. The nights were the worst. The daytime brought a hollow kind of numbness, but the night, God, the night was a different kind of war zone. I could never escape it. When I closed my eyes, the world around me didn't vanish, it exploded. There were moments when I'd be lying in bed, trying to find some sort of peace, and the darkness would suddenly twist. The walls seemed to breathe, slow, agonizing inhales and exhales, like the belly of some giant beast ready to swallow me whole. Shadows gathered in corners, thick and heavy, pooling with silent menace. The faint creak of the old house settling sounded like boots marching just beyond the door. Then came the sounds. They weren't just memories. They clawed into me, sharp as a knife. Explosions roared in my ears, rattling my ribcage. I could hear the screams, the ragged gasps of men caught in the hellfire. "Medic! Medic!" someone shouted, desperate and raw. It was a sound I still couldn't forget, still couldn't quiet. The bed would shake like the ground was splitting beneath me. Sweat soaked my shirt, chilled by the cold drafts that seemed to seep from nowhere. Sometimes, I bolted upright, gasping like I'd drowned. My heart slammed so hard I thought it might rip free from my chest. "Calm down, Michael. It's just a nightmare." But it never was just a nightmare. During the day, the world wasn't any easier. It felt like the entire city was a hostile environment. Every honk of a car horn, every siren blaring in the distance, was a call to arms. People walking too close, their shadows falling over me, every step was a threat. Once, I was at the grocery store, and the fluorescent lights flickered. For a moment, the aisle twisted in my vision, warping like the desert heat waves I remembered from the Middle East. I gripped the cart's handle tighter until my knuckles turned white. I could feel my breathing turn shallow, the sweat trickling down my back. Behind me, a kid dropped a can, and the clang echoed like a gunshot. I whipped around, fists clenched. The boy's wide eyes stared up at me, frozen in fear. I swallowed the panic rising in my throat and forced myself to nod, muttering a quiet apology. The shame hit me harder than the flashback. Sleep was a battleground, but so was waking life. I couldn't trust myself anymore. My hands shook like I'd been holding a rifle for weeks without rest. Sometimes, when I reached for a door handle or a cup, my muscles tensed like I was preparing for combat, and I'd drop whatever I was holding. At home, the silence was deafening. Noisy sounds, children laughing, dogs barking, radios blaring, felt like distant echoes of a war I'd escaped but never left. One afternoon, I caught my reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror. The face staring back was foreign. The dark circles under my eyes looked like bruises. My skin was pale and clammy, stretched tight over sharp cheekbones. I looked like I'd aged 10 years in a month. The man in the mirror wasn't me anymore. I barely recognized the haunted eyes staring back. I tried talking to my family. Tried explaining. But the words got caught in my throat. They couldn't understand the war that raged inside me. The way ordinary sounds could trigger the chaos in my mind. The way I flinched at sudden movements or loud noises. The way I woke up screaming, drenched in sweat. The way I couldn't stop the memories from flooding back. I stopped going out. The world outside was a minefield. Every trip to the store was a gauntlet of anxiety and fear. I shut the curtains, locked the doors, and wrapped myself in the suffocating silence of the house. But even there, I wasn't safe. One night, a thunderstorm rolled in. The wind howled through the trees, rattling the windows. Lightning flashed, illuminating the dark corners. The thunder cracked like a rifle shot. My heart pounded in rhythm with the storm. I sat in the dark, clutching the edge of the couch like it was a lifeline. The storm sounded like a battlefield. And for a moment, I wasn't home anymore. I was back there. I screamed into the darkness. My voice shattered the silence. It was the only way to fight the ghosts. The only way to remind myself I was still alive. But sometimes, I wondered if I really was. The next morning, I woke to an oppressive silence that clung to my chest like a weight. I lay there, muscles aching, eyes fixed on the cracked ceiling above, the sunlight slanting weakly through dusty blinds. My body screamed for release, some way to shake the memories, the nightmares, but my mind was a prison. I forced myself to get up. The air in the apartment was stale and thick, mixed with the faint scent of sweat and stale beer from the night before. I couldn't stop the tremors in my hands as I pulled on a shirt and stepped outside. The neighborhood looked innocuous in the harsh light of day, but the streets felt like a war zone. Every passerby was a possible enemy. The low murmur of conversation became indistinct gunfire, every honk a bomb blast. My heart slammed against my ribs, the panic rising, a tide that threatened to drown me. I kept my gaze low, my steps hurried but hesitant. My breathing was ragged and shallow, as if I was running 1,000 miles but never moving. I passed a group of teenagers on the corner, their loud laughter slicing through the still air like shrapnel. One of them, a kid with a broken baseball cap and a crooked grin, eyed me up and down. "Hey, you lost or something, old man," he sneered. I froze, my muscles tightening, every instinct screaming, danger. My eyes darted to his hand, which gripped a rock the size of a fist. Without thinking, I flinched backward. The rock sailed through the air, clanging against the metal trash can behind me, sending a spray of dented steel and trash tumbling to the pavement. "Chill, man," the kid said, smirking, but the damage was done. My pulse was pounding so hard I thought it would burst through my skin. My hands clenched into fists, trembling uncontrollably. The other kid snickered and moved on, but I felt raw and exposed, like a target marked with a bright red X. Back in the apartment, I slammed the door and leaned against it, breathing hard, sweat prickling my skin despite the cool air. The adrenaline buzzed, a jittery current that wouldn't fade. I tried to steady my shaking hands but they twitched uncontrollably, twitching like they had a mind of their own. I knew I had to reach out to someone, anyone, but the thought of explaining this chaos in my head was paralyzing. The weight of loneliness pressed down harder than any uniform or weapon ever had. That evening, the sky darkened with rolling clouds, and the wind began to pick up. I was in the kitchen when I heard the sharp screech of tires on wet asphalt outside. I paused mid-step, the sound triggering a cascade of memories. The smell of burning rubber, the explosion of glass, the final moments before the blast. I stepped outside, heart pounding. Down the street, a black sedan skidded to a halt, tires kicking up dirt and gravel. The driver slammed the door and stormed toward me, face twisted in anger. "You shouldn't be out here," he barked, voice low and threatening. I'm fine," I muttered, but my voice cracked under the strain. "You're not," he spat. "You look like hell. You want to get yourself killed?" His eyes were wild, unfocused, like he'd seen too much, too. I didn't respond. The world seemed to tilt, the sky darkening as a sudden storm broke overhead. Lightning cracked, illuminating the street in harsh, white flashes. The man's expression softened just a little. "Look, I don't want trouble," he said. "But you're walking around like a ghost. If you don't watch yourself, you're going to end up dead." The rain started pouring, heavy and cold. I watched him retreat to his car and speed off, tires hissing on the wet asphalt. Later that night, the storm raged. Thunder clapped like artillery, shaking the windows, rattling the frames. I sat frozen in the living room, the baseball bat resting heavy across my lap, eyes darting to every flicker of shadow. A sudden crash echoed from the kitchen. My heart seized. I stood slowly, every nerve screaming. I crept toward the sound. The glass cabinet door was shattered, shards scattered like deadly ice on the floor. A window near the sink was open, swinging on its hinges. The cold rain seeped inside, pooling around the broken glass. I checked every corner, every shadow. No sign of intrusion. Yet the sense of menace lingered like a fog. In the days that followed, the line between my past and present blurred further. Every noise became a threat. Every shadow held a secret. One afternoon, as I sat trying to eat, a sudden banging rattled the front door. I grabbed the bat and approached cautiously. "Michael. Open up." It was Mom's voice. Relief flooded me, but I hesitated. Could I trust the safety of someone else? I unlocked the door and let her in. But even in the warmth of her presence, I felt cold, hollow, and haunted. The war was not over. It lived in my blood, my bones. It was the shadow behind every face. The breath behind every whisper. And now, the enemy was no longer just in my mind. It was out there, waiting in the dark. The morning light felt like an ambush. Pale and relentless, it seeped through the cracked blinds and cast sharp lines across my living room floor. My body was still on edge from the night before, muscles tight and twitching as if braced for the next attack. Every sound, the hum of the fridge, the distant drone of traffic, the soft ticking of the clock, felt amplified, like enemy footsteps creeping closer. I moved through my apartment like a soldier navigating a minefield, careful with every step, every breath. Even the air felt thick, suffocating. I wrapped a threadbare jacket tighter around my shoulders, as if armor could keep the invisible war at bay. Stepping outside was like stepping into a war zone, except the enemy wasn't obvious. It was in the hostile stares of strangers, the sudden sharp movements, the way shadows seemed to twitch in the corners of my vision. At the corner store, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering slightly. The cashier was a young guy, probably barely out of high school, with sharp eyes that seemed to size me up in a heartbeat. He moved behind the counter with a kind of practiced wariness. When I handed over my cash, his fingers twitched near the phone as if ready to call someone at any sign of trouble. "You look like trouble," he said, voice low, barely audible over the hum. I swallowed hard, forcing a tight smile that felt like a mask. "Just trying to get by," I replied quietly. His gaze didn't soften. It was the kind of look you give a ticking time bomb, the kind you hope doesn't go off in your store. I grabbed my bag and left, the fluorescent light flickering behind me like a warning. Outside, the air was damp and sharp with the scent of rain. A man stood pacing near the sidewalk, his breath visible in the cold morning air. When he saw me, he stopped, eyes narrowed like a predator sizing up prey. "You from around here?" he asked, stepping closer with slow, deliberate steps. I shook my head, muscles tightening, ready to bolt. "Maybe you shouldn't be here." "Not alone," he warned, voice low and threatening. The words hung in the air, thick as smoke. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words caught in my throat. He stared at me like he was waiting for a reason to throw the first punch. Back in the safety of my apartment, I replayed the encounter on an endless loop. Every detail etched in sharp relief, the man's clenched jaw, the cold edge in his voice, the way his eyes seemed to hold a promise of violence. The walls closed in. The silence screamed. Every creak in the building was a threat. Sleep became a stranger. Then came the night the violence hit home. I was jolted awake by the roar of shouting and the crash of breaking glass outside. Heart hammering, I crept to the window. Down below, a crowd had gathered around a man sprawled on the pavement, blood pooling beneath him. The air was thick with fury and fear. One of the men in the crowd grabbed the victim's head and slammed it hard against the concrete. The sickening crack echoed through the street. I felt frozen, every instinct screaming to run but my body rooted in place. Finally, I stepped outside into the cold night, bat gripped tight in my hands. The crowd parted as I approached, faces twisting with menace and suspicion. "This ain't your fight, veteran," one of the attackers snarled. The word hit me like a bullet. I wasn't invisible. I wasn't safe. The war followed me, and now, so did the real threat. That night, I barricaded my door with whatever I could find. The bat felt heavy in my hands, a lifeline and a weapon. Outside, the storm howled, rain pounding against the windows like gunfire. The phone rang. A harsh, shrill sound cutting through the chaos. An unknown number. I stared at it, breath held, before letting it go to voicemail. The war hadn't ended. It was waiting. In every shadow. Every silence. Every knock on the door. The rain hammered on the windowpane like a barrage of bullets, each drop a sharp staccato in the oppressive darkness. I sat in the dim glow of a flickering lamp, the baseball bat resting heavy across my lap, fingers twitching involuntarily. The shadows in the room seemed to pulse, alive with silent threats. My ears strained for any sound beyond the storm. A creak, no, a scrape, near the front door made my blood run cold. The air shifted, thick with the stench of wet concrete and something sour, like sweat mixed with decay. I grabbed the bat and crept toward the door, every nerve screaming in a symphony of panic and readiness. A soft thud echoed outside. I pressed my ear to the cold wood. There it was again. A dull, heavy thump, then silence. My breath hitched. Someone was out there. Not just someone. They were testing me. Suddenly, a shadow flickered just beyond the peephole. I dropped the bat, hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the lock. The door shuddered under a heavy blow. Then another. Each impact felt like a hammer strike against my ribs. I braced myself and shoved the door open a crack. No one was there. Only the rain, slick and cold, swirling on the stoop. I peered into the darkness, empty streets glistening with puddles reflecting the harsh, flickering streetlights. A faint scraping sound drifted from the alley beside the building. Heart pounding, I edged toward it, bat raised. A shape lurched from the shadows. A man, soaked and wild-eyed, stumbled toward me, gasping. His face was a mask of blood and dirt, eyes wild with desperation. I stepped back, tension snapping tight. "Help me," he rasped. The words barely broke the night. I hesitated. War taught me one thing: trust was a luxury I couldn't afford. Suddenly, a low growl rose from the darkness behind him. I swung the bat instinctively. The man cried out, stumbling forward. From the alley, a second figure emerged, twisted, gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to suck the light from the world. The smell hit me then, rotting flesh and death. A low, guttural hiss escaped its cracked lips. I backed up, heart thudding like a war drum. The man on the ground clawed at me, desperate. "Run," he begged. "They're coming." Before I could react, the creature lunged. The fight was brutal and chaotic. I swung the bat with every ounce of strength left in my shaking arms. The creature's snarls filled the air, mixing with my ragged breaths and the wet slap of rain on pavement. I heard the sickening crunch of bone under bat. The creature collapsed, twitching, eyes glazed with hatred. The other man lay motionless, blood pooling beneath him. I stumbled back inside, slamming the door shut. Locked it. Double-locked it. I sank to the floor, chest heaving, hands covered in grime and something darker, something wet and warm. The war had followed me home. But this? This was something else. Something worse. Outside, the storm raged on. And I knew, without a doubt, I wasn't safe. Not anywhere. The hours crawled by like the slow drip of blood from a fresh wound. Each second stretched tight with unbearable tension. Outside, the rain had finally slackened, but the oppressive weight in my chest only grew heavier. The flickering glow of the lamp cast long, dancing shadows across the cracked walls of my apartment, making the room feel like a coffin built of light and darkness. I sat motionless in the corner, gripping the bat so tightly my knuckles turned white. Every creak and groan of the building sounded like a distant explosion in a battlefield, each whisper of whine through the cracked window an enemy scout creeping closer. My skin prickled with paranoia, a physical response I couldn't turn off. The stale air felt thick and suffocating, every breath sharp and ragged. Then, in the unbearable silence, it started. A faint scratching noise at the window. Slow and deliberate. The kind of sound that sets teeth on edge. The scrape of claws against glass. I froze, my blood turning ice cold. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I was rooted to the spot, eyes locked on the window. The scratching grew louder, more insistent. A shadow moved just beyond the frosted glass. I swallowed hard, heart pounding so violently it felt like it might burst through my ribcage. Suddenly, a heavy thud. Something slammed against the windowpane with brutal force. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the bat. My breath hitched in a strangled gasp. Peering cautiously, I caught sight of a pale face pressed against the glass, skin pulled tight over hollow cheekbones, lips curled into a twisted grin that revealed blackened, broken teeth. The eyes, black voids, locked onto mine like a predator savoring its prey. My chest tightened, cold sweat slicking my skin. The face disappeared as suddenly as it came. I barely had time to catch my breath before the phone shrilled violently. Unknown number. I ignored it, heart slamming. The scratching returned, this time at the door. Slow. Heavy. Relentless. I crept toward the entrance, every step a battle to keep my trembling limbs steady. The scratches turned into pounding, furious blows. My blood ran cold as a harsh whisper slithered through the crack beneath the door. "Let me in." The voice was hoarse, raspy, like nails scraping a chalkboard. I pressed my back against the wall, gripping the bat like a lifeline, willing myself not to scream. The lights flickered. Then, without warning, plunged into total darkness. The blackness wrapped around me like a suffocating shroud. My heart thundered in my ears, drowning out everything but the pounding at the door. I fumbled blindly for the phone, no signal. No help. Nothing but the pounding and the whispers outside. Suddenly, the emergency lights in the hallway outside kicked on, casting a sickly red glow through the crack beneath the door. And in that blood-red light, I saw them. Figures, dozens of them, lurking just beyond the threshold. Pale, gaunt shapes moving with unnatural jerks. Eyes glinting like coals. Claws scraping at the walls. Their low, guttural growls vibrated through the door. My breath caught in a strangled gasp. The power surged back on, the harsh fluorescent light revealing deep claw marks gouged into the doorframe. Fresh, bleeding wood splinters littered the floor. My sanctuary was breached. I was trapped. Alone. Hunted. The door shook again, harder this time. I raised the bat, knuckles white, muscles coiled. The shadow beneath the door stretched longer, thicker. And the whispered voice came again, more desperate now. "Open the door, we just want to come home." My blood ran cold. I realized then that whatever waited outside